Now you have identically that same order again for the second coming after the tribulation period taught by Jesus in Matthew 24. Many sincere Christians, many of whom I have great respect, believe that the rapture is being presented in Matthew chapter 24, and they believe it's being presented in two places in Matthew 24. Let me give you some background. In verse 15 of Matthew 24, Jesus refers to the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet back in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. Now, when you read Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, we are told there that the abomination of desolation will take place precisely in the middle of the 7-year tribulation period, or on the basis of Daniel 9:27, you could call it the 70th week of Daniel 9, right in the middle of that 70th week of Daniel 9. In other words, the abomination of desolation will take place before the second 3.5 years of that 7-year period of time. Then Jesus, after saying the abomination of desolation will take place, he warns ahead of time Jews who will be living in Israel at that time. He says, when you see that abomination of desolation taking place, then those who are in Judea should flee to the mountains. They should get out of there as fast as they can. And he tells them why in verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be, and except those days should be shortened, literally, should be cut off, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be cut off. In verse 22, Jesus said, and except those days should be literally cut off, there should be no flesh saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be cut off. What he is saying here is this, that when the abomination of desolation takes place in the middle of that 7-year period of time, that will be the starting point of what Jesus calls the Great Tribulation. So the Great Tribulation will begin in the middle of the 70th week of Daniel 9, or if you prefer, in the middle of the 7-year tribulation period. And Jesus clearly indicates here in verses 21 and 22 that that Great Tribulation will be the unparalleled time of trouble in all of world history, the likes of which he said have not been since the beginning of the world, nor will ever be again in all of history. This will be the unparalleled time of trouble for planet Earth. Now, with that as background, we come to verse 29. Having just referred to the Great Tribulation, Jesus says, immediately after the tribulation of those days. So he's talking about what's going to happen immediately after the Great Tribulation. Shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. He's saying immediately after the end of the Great Tribulation, there will be great cosmic disturbances in the heavenly realm. And then, Jesus said, shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, the sign that he's coming out of heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now he's clearly talking here about his glorious second coming immediately after the end of the future 7-year tribulation period. And he's saying that one thing that his angels, his holy angels, will do when he sends them out of the world at his glorious second coming is this: they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now some people say, well, obviously the elect here would be God's people, and so this has to be a reference to the church saints, and so this is referring to the gathering of the church saints out of the world to take them to heaven in conjunction with his glorious second coming out of heaven after the tribulation period. And so they would say this has to be a reference to the rapture of the church, that the church will be raptured out of the world in conjunction with the glorious second coming of Christ back to planet Earth immediately after the tribulation period. And so they would say, look, this is indicate a post-tribulation rapture of the church. The question here is this: who are the elect that he gathers with a great sound of a trumpet from the four winds of heaven? Are they the church saints? I'm convinced that they are not. Let me tell you why. For one thing, if you're going to say these are church saints, you are overlooking some extensive revelation that's given to us in the Old Testament. What kind of revelation? There are passages in the Old Testament where God calls the whole nation of Israel his chosen, literally his elect. Then there are passages in the Old Testament where God specifically refers to the remnant of believers within the nation of Israel who are his elect. There are passages in the Old Testament where God said that because Israel so stubbornly and persistently rebelled against him for centuries, that he would scatter them to the four winds. Or some places says that he would scatter them to the four corners of the earth. And he did, through their captivities, the Assyrian captivity, the Babylonian captivity. He scattered them in every direction. Then there are passages, these are prophetic promise passages in the Old Testament to the effect that in the end times, that he would gather together his chosen ones, his elect, particularly the believing remnant of Israel from all corners of the earth, gather them together, even from the four winds, gather them together again so that they could go into the millennial kingdom with the Messiah whenever he reigns. Now here's an intriguing thing. We are told here in Matthew 24, verse 31, he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds. The Greek literally says, with the sound of a great trumpet. Let me read to you a fascinating promise that God delivered to Israel through the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 27, verses 12 and 13. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall beat off from the channel of the river unto the stream of Egypt, and you shall be gathered one by one, O ye children of Israel. And it shall come to pass in that day that the great trumpet shall be blown, and they shall come which were ready to perish in the land of Assyria, and the outcasts in the land of Egypt, and shall worship the Lord in the holy mount at Jerusalem. God here was promising toward the end times, if you read the whole context, that he's going to regather his scattered people of Israel from many different places around the world, and he will do that in conjunction with the blowing of the great trumpet. Again, I read to you a literal translation of Matthew 24, verse 31, where Jesus says that immediately after the tribulation, the cosmic disturbances, then he comes as the Son of Man. He shall send his angels with the sound of a great trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. In light of those Old Testament parallels, I'm convinced that the elect here in Matthew 24:31 are not church saints, but the people of Israel who've been scattered throughout the world, perhaps even more specifically, the faithful remnant of Jews who have become believers in the Lord during the 7-year tribulation period and who are still alive on the face of the earth. At his glorious second coming back to the earth immediately after the tribulation period, he will gather together this faithful remnant of Jews from all over the world with the sound of a great trumpet back to the land of Israel.